And then mutual release, fun story. Rosie and Michelle have always asked me to do mutual releases because I was like the queen of mutual releases. I think I had almost 32 mutual releases in 2020. But I do work a lot with investors, and that is a huge, huge thing when it comes to that. So mutual releases are just second nature. Knock on wood, 2021 has not been the same. So I don't know. I did change from investors, but yeah. Anyways, mutual release has its own whole different packet. So let's talk about mutual release in general. Mutual release, I release because of an inspection. I release because I get cold feet. I release because of appraisals. I release because dad didn't like it once he saw it, type of thing. I release because of financial purposes. There is not a day that goes by that if I have a mutual release, it is a whole different scenario every single time. It is completely different. There's no similar mutual releases in my opinion. It's just like just like selling every house, it's typically not the same. So each case is a case by case basis. So looking at mutual release, I have it written down somewhere. So there is a process. I'm going to go back real quick. So please hold. So the process, do you want me to go over this? Yeah, okay. So the process is like basically you have a mutual release. So you have a loop already, little loop, but somehow you hold the earnest money already. So you need to release that back to the buyer if you're the seller. Or yeah, if Platt holds the earnest money, you have to do this process. So we'll go over the process first, and then we'll go over the document. If you got served a mutual release from the buyer, I'm the seller. You got served a mutual release and the buyer needs the money back, and you all agree to the buyer having the money back. We, as the sellers, typically hold the earnest money, right? Platt takes the earnest money if it's a buyer. So because we might have this earnest money at Platt Collective, then we need to submit this process in order to release the funds. So actually, I think I have somebody that's already done this for me. Thank you. Off the top of my head. So basically what you do is you start a loop and you name it mutual release loop, and you write, my teammates and we worked together and we had to release this one because of the inspection purposes. So basically, long story short, we had to go in here and we had to add the mutual release and we had to add the listing contract. And then so once it was served for the mutual release, we started a mutual release folder or tab or whatever you want to do. And then we also have to put the listing contract for the sellers. So in this mutual release, using it for example, it says that it needs to be paid to the seller. So the earnest money is currently held at Platt Collective for this example. And so it has to be paid back to the seller. And we'll go over this scenario in a second. So Platt Collective, Ashley had to call her and let her know where the address was for the seller who we were representing. And so you have to go in, insert the mutual release into a folder. You have to add the listing contract because you should have already had that executed if you listed the property. And then you go into the upper right-hand corner and you click submit and you submit it to Platt. And I'm hoping this is good. Oh, and then there's mutual release. And then why are you submitting this for review? And then I just simply say like submitting, oops. So you can submit the money to Rosie at the address, something like that. Like this, for example, I just didn't want to type his name, David Rapp. You could send it to them at this address. So then when Ashley gets it, she will have already had the address in which she needs to send the earnest money back to. She might question it or flag it, but that's always something that you can do. So she'll see this note, and she'll also see the mutual release in there. So that's the process of doing a mutual release if you're the seller. So just note that if you are trying to get the money back and it's held at plat, you have to do this mutual release process. If you got questions, just reach out. I'm able to help. But let's go over mutual releases. I'm going to just go to a blank mutual release first. There are scenarios, like I said, that you can run around. You can get a lot of legal battles over mutual releases, like a lot of legal battles in mutual releases. You can also win. Hold on, sorry. 1 second. I just like used one of my old listings to put in the template. So mutual release, it's typically mutual release from purchase agreement. There is a mutual release from a listing contract. So I presume that's probably going to be in the section of oops, sorry. This, so from listing contract, we won't go over that because it's probably pertaining to listings, but there are 2 different mutual releases, so you just need to make sure you know which one you're talking about. This is like saying, hey, we're just not going well when you're selling your house, let's just release from it. But that goes a little bit more into depth, so that'll probably go with compensation. Okay, so here's a typical mutual release from purchase agreement. So it's pretty self-explanatory. Fill in the blanks: date, buyer, seller, listing, broker, buy. Let's say it's me, Chris Glassburn, by Plat Collective, selling broker, Rosie the Realtor, by Plat Collective, at this address. And when it was actually the accepted date. So let's just say we accepted the purchase agreement on the 1st, we were supposed to close on the 14th, but we're not going, and it was accepted the 2nd. So the purchase agreement was dated the 1st, and it was actually accepted on the 2nd. Shall the deposit of $4,000, let's just say that. So all parties agreed that the earnest money deposit of $4,000 shall be returned to, and this is what becomes the most particular situation. And I actually called Crystal the other day, even though I've done thousands of these, just to clarify, because you have to make sure your timeline is as accurate as possible when you, as someone that's representing the seller, is trying to get the money back for the seller. If you, as the buyer, are trying to get your earnest money back and you're in your designated timeframes, like inspections timeframe and such, you should have no problem getting your money back. But if you have gone past your inspection timeframe and maybe past your financial timeframe, then the likelihood of you getting your money back as a buyer is very slim. And so this is where it becomes a little bit ugly when you have to say, click return to buyers, return to sellers, or maybe you split the difference. Maybe, you as the agent always needs to get on the phone with the buyer's agent or the seller's agent and talk with them, because otherwise you're just going to send this over and you guys are going to keep going back and forth. So a prime example would be if you are mutually, the key word is mutual release, right? It's not necessarily, it's a guarantee. It's, you must agree, both parties must agree to mutually release. So I've ran into 2 situations where legal was pulled into mutual releases. And one of them being, and these are just examples, but one of them being is, we went past our inspection timeframe and we actually went past our financial timeframe. So we were almost out of contract and we submitted the mutual release on the day that we were supposed to close. And I had a very intelligent agent on the other side who knew what was happening. So long story short, He was like, I'm not going to. Your contract expires tomorrow. So your contract's expired. So therefore, I don't have to mutually release you. I can go back and sue you because you are now not under contract and you are not performing in what you said you were going to perform. So going full circle, what had happened was I represented the buyer and we actually had to pay double the amount of earnest money to get out of the contract. Otherwise, they were going to take us to courts because we expired, and then he did not get the second round. So he put it back on the market and we offered 225. The second round, he got 220. So he was going to go after us for another 5K because he didn't get what we had him under contract for. So you just really, really have to reiterate to your buyers, particularly if they are going to get cold feet or if this is a flip or an investment property, that all their numbers align perfectly, because there's a section in the purchase agreement, I think it's section number 3, that talks about legal ramifications. I believe that's what it's called. And that basically says that like the seller has the right to sue you if you don't perform. And if you fall out of contract, that's not performing. If you try to mutually release from a purchase agreement when you're past the inspection time frame, that's not performing. If you are not financially stable enough to purchase the house, maybe VA loans are hard. Like maybe a VA loan like just falls out after a while because of your credit score, that's not performing as well. So mutual releases are super ugly. I would highly recommend, if you're a newer agent and you're going to do a mutual release, ask help. Don't like just assume you know it all, because you could get your client sued. So that's one example. Another example, so representing the buyer there, we ended up having to pay double the amount of money. Another example that I have is like how I retained it for my seller was the buyers submitted an inspection response in a timely manner like they should have. However, we said we'll submit an extension because we needed one more quote. And they didn't sign the extension. So I called Crystal, and Crystal was like, well, because they didn't sign the extension, then the buyer's inspection response was basically agreed upon, which we were going to fix everything anyways, but the buyer's was basically agreed upon, and they served us with a mutual release. So they have already gone past their inspection time frame, and we agreed to do their inspection time frame. But they were like, well, we want our money back. I'm like, well, there's no reason why you get your money back because we agreed to the inspection items. So we did go back and forth a couple of times, both myself and the buying agent or the buyer's agent, kind of reiterating why. And I think sometimes when you go back and forth with agents, sending summary emails are not a bad thing, especially when you're dealing with legal issues. So just keep that in mind. In my opinion, is if you have anything in writing, just really make sure that, or if you have anything verbal, just make sure you like follow up with the summary. Rosie, the realtor, said this, and I said this, and we agreed upon this. And it's just an email, but that holds up in court if it needs to hold up in court. So anyways, other than that, so it's, if you are within a designated time frame, such as like inspection, financial, anything like that, mutual releases are not hard. It's when you get a little hairy and you start going past timelines is when I think you should definitely ask for help until you get your first one. And everyone will get one. There's not an agent I know that has not done a mutual release before. So it's going to be shocking your first round. You're going to be upset and sad and why did I do wrong? But I think, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade type of situation. So maybe it's a good thing. Maybe you represent the buyer and they find a more perfect house, or maybe you represent the seller and you're like, good riddance, buyer that wanted everything done on their inspection response they shouldn't even ask for, type of things. So just remember, it's not the end all be all when you mutually release. It just gives you a teaching experience or a learning experience. And then it also allows for better things to happen. So that's all I have to teach to you today.